Nearly 18 months into the new administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the state of the Nigerian economy remains under pressure, even as the government sticks to what it often describes as tough economic reform agenda. Now, the latest in some of the measuring line for the current administration is the latest GDP report for the third quarter ended September, as well as the new General Household Survey, both data conducted by the Statistics Office. Let's bring in my guests to discuss this and more. Welcome, Professor Ken Ife, a development economist and a public policy analyst live in our Abuja studios. It's great having you once again on our Rice Exchange tonight, Professor.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
We appreciate your time. Professor, what do you make of the Tinubu's economics, some 1.5 years since he took office?
I think he has ruffled the feathers. And so you can actually see the depth of the macroeconomic challenges that we have. You know, when you have something, you haven't seen the full length of it, then you know, your reactions will be, is it a cup that is half full or is it a cup that is half empty? So what has happened is that he has actually struck every part of it. Everybody now knows where we are and how deep the challenge is. There are areas of successes. You know, if you look at, first of all, one thing that has characterized in Nigeria, even before his administration, is that we have what I call fiscal dominance over monetary policy. And that has been something we inherited. It starts from import dependency of our economy, monocultural nature of the only source that is giving us 90% of our forex, even though you've played it down on government revenue, oil and gas, they don't go for more than 50%. So they're heading down to 35% by projection. So they don't disturb the budget as much. But the fact that they account for 90% of the forex, that means that we have a problem. And so that's just one of the things. You have other dimensions of fiscal dominance, fiscal dominance of monetary policy. You have the debt situation, where government is going to central bank to take more money than the law permits. The law says 5% of your last year's revenue. It went to 10% now, but what they actually took away was 35 trillion, which is so many thousand times more than what the limit would be. So that is equals to inflation. And we are now struggling to mop up that liquidity, to take it out, to stop the pressure on domestic demand pool inflation. But you have a cost rise horizon that partly because of the import dependency, you have imported inflation, but partly because of import dependency, you have them increasing the input cost to manufacturing sector. So even service sector are feeling the same. Cost of transportation is going up, gas, diesel, electricity bills. A lot of all those input costs are edging up. So you go to the market, the price is never what it was yesterday. Manufacturers can't help you. So you've got that, but the fourth one, which is why you call it stagflation. The fourth one is a very complicated form of inflation. The fourth one, which is what you call cross-border demand pool inflation, is totally outside our control. Monetary policy can't do anything about it. And those are those 100 Francophone citizens in those 6 countries surrounding us, where the drop in our currency, which is about 80% devalued relative to theirs, obviously theirs are up far too high. But that is continuing to put pressure on our demand. And then there's nothing fiscal policy can do there. So all of those complicate our inflation. Then, of course, another thing that the fiscal policy is doing to monetary policy is that the debt, particularly the debt of foreign denominated loan, is putting pressure. Because now that we have the benefit of NMPC resources coming through the central bank and then allowing some accretion to the reserve, now, the danger is if what is coming through from fiscal strategy paper looking for $75 benchmark, that is wiping away the headroom that will allow accretion to reserve through excess crude account. It means that we are going to be pushing, and then we are taking dollar-related euro bond and all that costs very much, over 8%, 9%, very, very expensive. So you are using expensive short-term money to service longer-term debt. That's going to put us into a debt trap as far as forex-related revenues are concerned. And if that continues, it means that very soon there will be a cost to foreign reserves to be able to meet and avoid any shortfall in repayment, service payment. So that is the situation we have to avoid. So what means you've got to move away. Move away to bilateral loans, multilateral loans, where you can get moratorium, long-term borrowing, 10% more. So that is where we need to be moving away. And Sukuk bond is good because it's project tied. And I say all this because this is how fiscal pressure is coming on top of monetary policy. Now, the fiscal responsibility law, which guides borrowing, government borrowing and government fiscal management, is very, very clear. It says borrow for capital expenditure long term. Long term means 10 years, 20 years, concessionary rates, which means under 3%. Then have a cost-benefit analysis so that we know that these things ought to be project-based and you can see how it could recover itself. So we want to see all that transparency. And then capital expenditure and human resource development. Human resource is clear: health, education, employment. The law does not allow you to borrow these monies and then use it for any other thing. You have domestic revenue, you have, what do you call it? You have all other forms of government revenue. If you have those, share them as you want. Do anything you want to them, So, but when you have to go out to borrow, the law is very, very explicit on what has to happen. You must have a cost-benefit analysis so that we know that this quantum of money for this project is capable of repaying itself and people can see it. And when you go for project-tied loans like Sukuk, sovereign Sukuk, you can see what it is. You see it on the road there. You go to China, bilateral, you can see, even though it is project-tied, you will still see what they are doing. They are building a new reserve, new airports, stuff like that. You can see those airports that they are building there. You can see them. So that's the temptation that we are facing now, that we need to tighten up on fiscal management and then get the right. And I tell you something, that same law, Fiscal Responsibility 2007, says any lending, it says to the financial institutions, any lending outside this framework is unlawful. So which means that the judgment day will come at some point, because the law, the extant law that regulates what has to happen on the borrowing arena to make it sustainable.
So that at the macros level, and you've painted a very good picture of where we are. But again, when you look at the economy and the general households in Nigeria over the past 18 months, and we try to narrow down the macroeconomics to the household level in terms of spending, consumption, and all of that, what are the reality that Nigerians currently face?
Okay, if you look at GDP composition, household consumption accounts for about 74, 75, around that sort of very, very high household consumption. And there are two things about household consumption. You promote household consumption to ensure that it will support aggregate production. Because if you continue to depress the household consumption, it has a repercussion on the production, on aggregate product output. So aggregate output will go down if the household consumption goes down. Now, government consumption is second parameter in GDP composition. But of course, our government consumes only about 5 to 7%, 5%, depending, it's just always less than 10%. So it's not as material, but it sends a very strong signal. When you use government purchasing power to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to buy made in Nigeria. And then you buy Nigerian cars, buy Nigerian products. You don't need to tell the foreign importers that the time has come for you to come and assemble this product in Nigeria. The government is not going to buy yours. So they know 230 million population, government is turning they will start coming here to assemble these products. That is the signal that you send, even though your consumption is only about 7%, but the signal that you send to external people is, I'm going to focus on this. Even without changing tariffs, they will start rushing in here. Look, I spent a week in Togo on the ECOWAS mission, and I was looking out for 7 days. I was looking out for jeeps, this four-wheel drive. I was looking out for them. I couldn't find any for 7 days. I know there will be somewhere, but in Nigeria, before you turn your head, before you say jack, 10 of them will cost price you. But I was looking for them. You go to Benin, you don't see as much of them in the street, but go to their parks. They have over 400,000 waiting to enter Nigeria. So there's something about our consumption. So whilst you can't stop the general public, government can do something by sending that signal to this import community and said, I want to support my local, whatever is locally made here, come in here. If you want to do business in Africa, come in here. And they will come. Where is the natural place to go? Where you have the huge population, where you have natural resource. We have the capacity to buy anything because we are endowed. We are a resource-rich country.
Professor Ken, what I was trying to ask has to do with breaking down the GDP. We're going to go to the GDP numbers, basically speaking. But the nominal GDP, based on the third quarter we have, was 199.7 billion US dollars, just roughly 200 billion dollars. Per capita income is about $1,109. That's in nominal terms. In PPP terms, which is purchasing parity, is about 6,320. So dollars per each of us, 320 million Nigerians. So when you look at this in the household consumption, household spending in Nigeria, what does it reveal, really show about the size of the GDP and the capacity of the GDP to benefit an individual households in Nigeria?
Now, GDP is just a number. And it's not a number that we are going to use. The GDP number doesn't put food on your table because the GDP itself, in terms of Naira, we even have in just one quarter an increase of 10 trillion Naira on our GDP based on last quarter. Last quarter was, how much was it? It was about 60 trillion. But now it's 71.3 trillion. So 10 trillion jump. Now, for the last 10 years, it has always been an increase. It hasn't dropped, it has been increasing. But when you apply the exchange rate, you divide it by the exchange rate, then you can see that it goes up and goes down. Today it is 500 billion, next day it's 250. Now it's only around 200, it's only almost 200.
Yes. So
it goes up and down. But the purchasing power parity, the GDP purchasing power parity is $1.23 trillion. Now that is what accurately measures the size of your economy using a notional value of a dollar. International notional value of dollar. So it still shows, it correlates with our Naira GDP because there is a certain size of consumption in our country, both government and household. Then there is investment, a disappointment on investment because the FDI that will enter into the equation. And then also have the last component of GDP is the balance of payments, which you also know is struggling because of our excessive dependence on import. So those are the four things that come together to give you the value of the GDP. You know, the investment that you have into the country, all that stuff. So those are the four. So in terms of...
yes. So when you look, sorry, Professor, respectfully, so when you look at, if you put all of this together in terms of the size of the GDP in dollar terms, in local currency terms, the nominal factor, what does it reveal about how the economy is reacting to the various reform policies and actions of the government? And let me quickly quote, this was flashed a little bit earlier, and this came from the special advisor to the president on media and publicity communications just this afternoon after the GDP report came out. President Tinubu, quoting the media statement from the presidency, it says that President Tinubu is excited by the latest report from the National Bureau of Statistics that the economy grew in the third quarter, and the fourth line on that says we want to rest until Nigerians feel the positive impacts in their pockets and experience a better living standard. The statement said the latest GDP number shows how much work needs to be done. Do you agree with this comment attributed to Mr. President?
No, I'm glad that the Mr. President said that, recognizes that much work needs to be done. On the surface of it, there is an increase in GDP rate. You know, it's gone from 2.5 to 3.19, and this year, this month, quarter again, last quarter, it went to 3.46. It's showing signs of growth. But when you come behind that and disaggregate the data, you will see some disappointing areas. For example, agriculture is purely posting 1.14%, which is even a drop compared to last quarter's one, which was 2.8. And so what you say to yourself, if your agriculture is growing at 1 point, and your population is growing at 3%, and your urbanization is 4.6%, clearly, there's a mismatch there. But when you look into agriculture, you will actually see that crop production has jumped. That is the highest jump. Crop production. Crop production went up by 26.5%. If you look at all the items that caused the increase. So crop production is doing well, but there are others. There are 4 of them. So crop production is only one. Then you come to industry. There's a complete meltdown on industry. The industry is posting it's ridiculous, less than 1%. The manufacturing sector is 0.9%. It's very, very disappointing. And in fact, the contribution of industry to GDP has actually gone down to 17%, just around 18%. Agriculture showed an increase in terms of contribution to about 28%. Will you believe? It used to be about 20, 21, but it's gone up to 20%. But the thing that drove the growth is crude oil, because we have increases in crude oil. It went over by about 5%, but less than over 10% that it did in the last quarter. But nevertheless, it is still a decent growth. Then you come to non-oil sector. Non-oil sector is where you have the growth. The growth is coming from ICT sector. Financial institution is over 30% growth rate, even though they account for less than 6% of our GDP. And the ICT sector account for almost 19% of the GDP, even though their growth was a bit subdued to about 5%. So those sectors are the ones that are giving us the agility. You have trade, you have ICT, you have financial services, very robust growth in financial services. So they all combine to drive the overall figure. But you need to see them one by one to see where there were some disappointing developments. And, so it's, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, the devil is in the details. So technically, back to what Mr. President says, there's still much work to be done when you look at these key sectors: agriculture, trade, manufacturing, where we expect to see more job creation, for example, and putting productivity to work, in the manner of speaking. And these are some of the sectors that should be leading that. But at the current levels and pace, Professor Ken, how rapidly do you think the economy can grow or needs to grow at a faster and a much stronger pace in order to positively impact on Nigerian households and individuals? We're currently doing about 3%, and yeah, we say, yes, we're doing well, but when you consider population and a few other things, exchange rate, inflation, what have you, that 3% is in the water, technically speaking.
Well, I've given you the breakdown of it, the rooms for optimism and the pessimistic picture. But I have, on balance, if we are going to create employment in our country, we need to have growth. And I've just said that I'm happy about what I see on the monetary sphere, on the monetary policy area, because the greatest danger to our economy was the arbitrage in the foreign transactions. You have different rates on the government side, and then you have the black market. Those rates were creating arbitrage opportunities, and they were messing about the entire fiscal policy. So now that they have zeroed, they closed down that gap. Even though it is at a higher level of 1,600 plus naira to a dollar, but you have closed it. FAC will come today, tomorrow they translate it to dollar. Leave them there. The dollar will not make any money. So they'll keep playing their game with dollarization of our economy, and will continue to maintain that rate. But what happens is this: just because you are maintaining and closing that rate, it sends signal to foreign portfolio investors, you can actually bring your money now, and then hopefully this rate will be maintained. In 12 months or 6 months, you can take your money back. And then it gives the central bank some room to have accretion to our reserves through petroleum-related business, waiting for the rainy day. Because when the rain comes, the foreign reserve is over $40 billion. Can we just have this continue to go to $50 billion to give that comfort that we can still borrow money and we can still repay? And then we can have investors come in and they can take their money when they are leaving. Yes. So that is very, very important, because once you arrest that area, then you can turn around to the fiscal side to say, what more can we do on the fiscal side?
That's my question, Professor Ken. What more can the fiscal side do to ramp up on productivity? Folks need to earn decent money. They need to create wealth. They need to find disposable income. of their lives. They need to pay bills, whether they're by petrol into the generator or they're paying higher rate on band A for electricity. Salaries had to have meaning in the pockets of Nigerians. That's my question. Foreign portfolio investor, leave them alone, Professor. What do we do at home for 230 million Nigerians?
Yeah, we know that the name of the game is productivity. Yes, we know that the name of the game is add value to what God has given you. God has given us all kinds of natural resources. Who has more? Tell me, who has more land, fertile land in Africa than Nigeria? Who has more population to farm the land than Nigeria, 230 million? And why is it not producing? We have scope to produce more, but you also have to deal with the danger in import dependency. And then once you can promote value addition, then that can move to increase, strengthen export. And I've heard about targets of 1 trillion in export. You know, fine, you have to push that because that creates jobs at home. Rather than push raw materials and then you having job, you are sending away our job overseas. So that's one. But of course, you have to realize that infrastructure plays a critical role in even doing that natural resource, because you have to have quality infrastructure to enable your product to be fit for the purpose to enter into international market. Now, you also have mineral resources that you are endowed. We have 44 solid minerals. Mineral is taking place because I have seen rapid growth in the mineral from a very low base, but the growth rate is phenomenal. So let's push on, keep on helping them to bring in, so it becomes a factor in fiscal strategy paper, in one of the things that you use to compute. Then you come to oil and gas, which are our major state that gives us 90% of the forex. We are now beginning to turn the page on that sad, very sad story by Dangote coming on stream. But there are modular refineries also coming on stream. So all that hemorrhage of $8 billion that we were spending extra by using that to pay for subsidy and bring that, we can now begin to get savings. But we need to support them so that we not only meet our needs, but also can export some of these refined products. That's where we begin to breathe life into our monetary policy and give them the space, the policy space that they need to support the economy. And I tell you this, it is the dominance, is the fiscal dominance of monetary policy that has been causing all the problems that we are having in this country. And that's what made the last central bank jump up and down. And now we have to make sure that our borrowing must be sustainable.
Yes.
You know, you have to plan, borrow more from the country so that you can choke away the oxygen in the excessive liquidity.
Yes.
And then go for the cheaper ones. Yes, go for the low-cost loans that gives us the space, the policy space by 10 years, moratorium. So, yeah, because otherwise, if you ever miss the repayment, all the rating agencies will come down to Nigeria like a ton of bricks. And then, of course, it gets more difficult for you to borrow when they downgrade.
I'm not too sure if we ever have enough time to discuss the state of the economy, but thank you so much. We appreciate your deep insight and perspectives into these key national development issues. But Kenny, thank you very much. Have a wonderful Monday evening and see you again soon on the show.